Okay, I think we're going to just keep going. What an inspiring panel. Thank you so much. I wrote lots of notes and I learned a lot today. And I think we're all on the same message. Have a lot of the ideas you all presented. I'm going to try to wrap them in. We've got about 40 minutes left, so let's try to stick it out. It's that part of that afternoon where we're starting to sink a little into our chairs. You guys have been doing a lot of listening. But I'll try to keep the energy up. I still promise to try to get to some strategies. Here are the strategies, and again, they were touched on by the panel, so very, very inspiring. And I really think their stories get at the heart. You know, I talked about getting the head. Maybe I'm going to bring us a little bit back to the head. But I think getting to the heart of a lot of these issues and how they really profoundly impacted these students' experience, the relationship piece at their current school was so striking to me. So it sounds like such a wonderful school. So you haven't forgotten this model, right? And we're on to module 2. There's a couple other concepts I wanted to just point out. And these are the two from this module that we talked to teachers about. This idea of observation and the need to really, today I think we were doing some observation in the sense that we were listening to the panel and really trying to take in their experience, which gets at that perspective taking. But in the action of the classroom, observation is a very powerful tool to get to know students. And why this is so important is we have a lot of research to show that we have confirmation bias. If we start getting into a negative rut with a student, we're trying to prove our own hypotheses that student is not doing well. And we can actually stop seeing the positive behaviors that student's doing. It's just a human tendency to confirm those biases. So by working with our staff to really do and integrating time to reflect and observe, I think it can be a powerful intervention. In the core, we ask teachers, if they're kind of in a difficult cycle with a student, to do some pre-post reflection. It's hard to even say this out loud because teachers are under such a crunch. It's hard to build in reflection time. We're doing that today, which is a real privilege to do some reflection. But I want to recognize how hard this is. But for the administrators in the room, if there's any way to kind of carve out some time for reflection, where a teacher can do this pre-post, asking some questions, what are my beliefs about this student? What behaviors do I expect to see? Then do some observation of that student in their class. And how did my beliefs affect what I looked for? Was something surprising about their behavior? So in the core, this is one of our narrators in the core, Dr. Crumpton. He talks about the idea of keeping a journal, videotaping students. And this is in the awareness module. It's really taking the time to become aware more, learn more about that student and how they're interacting in the class. We similarly say there's many relationships stuck in a rut. You know, sometimes we call them frequent flyers when we think about like disciplinary referrals. But if you flip that around, you can also say some teachers get stuck in a rut with a very particular student. And you can look at the referral patterns and see that student's doing fine in other classes. But that one teacher is just stuck in a rut. They're just like in this negative cycle. I was interviewing teachers about these stuck in a rut relationships, and it was striking because one teacher called this student, this African-American girl, just defiant. She's out to get me. Every day she comes in, she's just totally defiant. I went and interviewed all her other teachers, and a couple of the teachers said, yeah, she's kind of loud, but I just circle her in, and I try to engage that energy. And then I interviewed her about her teachers, and she said, yeah, he knows me. We get on, but this other teacher, he hates me. So you can see that rut that had formed where the teacher was in tunnel vision, felt really helpless and needed support. But other teachers were working really well with that very same student. So what we do is we call for this idea of first awareness. Create an awareness that you're stuck in a rut. Reach out for help. Spend some time doing some observations. Some reflection questions. When was the last time you had a positive interaction with that student you're stuck in a rut with? Do you have any more negative than positive? What do you like or dislike about that student? Can you find anything you appreciate about that student? And how do I expect that student to act? So again, we asked teachers to do some data gathering about those stuck in the rut relationships. So I said this before, this idea of really trying to reflect yourself. Do your staff ever have moments of reflection about these stuck in rut relationships or other opportunities for practicing observation. So now I'm going to move us through in our last time today through modules 3 through 5. So these modules really get at this bubble, this one right here. You see the last blue bubble, interact effectively in the classroom. And this is where we start to kind of dig down into classroom management practices and instructional strategies. So the first, again, to remind you, is this idea of self-awareness about your perceptions, backing up and doing some observation, seeing if you can get more objective, seeing if you're seeing students in a certain light and you can't even see their positive behaviors anymore. And modules 3 through 5 cover feeling safe and happy, helping students feeling capable and valued, and finally being engaged in learning. So we focus on how to create more engaging classrooms. All right, so these strategies may seem really obvious, but we just heard from the students. Check them out. Get to know your students. Ding, check, we heard that. We heard that in many different ways. Have fun with your students. Ding, check, right? And being sensitive to their needs. So I'm going to talk about a couple of these. Like my ding. All right, so Eddie Fergus, we interviewed him on the modules, and I just typed up his quote here, because I think it's really insightful. He said, "It's amazing how neighborhood are used in this loosey-goosey way to create an archetype for who a kid is." He said the flats, and that's probably referencing the Bay Area, but the other side of the tracks. It's a neighborhood. They use it like language like a placeholder for everything they need to know about their kids, summed up in one word, right? And it becomes problematic because it becomes their point of reference in understanding who these kids are without ever asking the question, who are you? Not only is it where do you live, but what is it like living there? They're never exploring these sets of questions. They're creating archetypes based on these constructed labels. So we see this kind of almost typologies of students starting to get created through shorthand. And I think it's quite pernicious that we need to be careful. It can slip into the, we have watch lists and then we create, oh, that kid's from there. And we got to dig underneath that and find out about how students are making meaning of their own context without us laying on assumptions about who they are. I had one student, a young African-American girl, come to me and say, "I am so sick of people assuming that my mother, I'm raised by a single mother and I'm low income." Everybody thinks that. They just make this assumption. So I think those are kind of, you can unearth examples like that all over the place where kids feel like assumptions are laid onto them. So I told you before about kind of following kids through a school and interviewing their different teachers. I wanted to tell you about this one girl. She was having a lot of problems with a lot of teachers, referrals for defiance, disrespect. But then she had this one science teacher, and this is what he said when I interviewed him. I chat with her about her friend. She's transgendered, so we have lots of talks about that and her gender identity. So I try to let her know that I appreciate where she's coming from. So this same science teacher had started school first period, and when I interviewed her, she said to me the other day, he put on the overhead, so that was back in the overhead days, the front page of the Oakland Tribune, and it talked about shooting in my neighborhood. And he said, over the weekend, some of you may have been affected by this, and I need to say that before we talk about science. And she said her jaw dropped. She told me, that was it. I was all his for the rest of the year. I'll do anything he said, because I heard the shooting, and she went into it, and she said, it only took a few minutes, but he recognized that some of us were living some of the realities coming up on the paper and the news, and how we were being impacted. And she said something like, he's some old white hippie dude, but I thought he could kind of get where I was coming from. And then that was his perspective. So it was kind of this beautiful surround sound about this idea of social conversations and speaking outside the content area. We've also talked about this idea of having fun with students. So, and I think you brought, Jessica, right? Yep. You brought up this idea that, we're all stressed and it's so hard to remember sometimes, that there's the pressure to deliver content is like this huge stone, that you're carrying. So are there times when you can kind of mindfully put down that stone and try to connect with your kids? So we ask folks to take a moment to reflect, how much do you show enthusiasm through your day, even for content? Because that really matters. So think about the educators who were in your mind. When I asked, like, let educators float into your mind, you stand on their shoulders. Many of them really demonstrated their passion for their content area, and it can be infectious. But they may have had some fun with you. Maybe not all of them, that's maybe not why they floated into your mind, but some of them had some laughs. So I think that the challenge is, when we think about equity, we also have to think about how equitably are we distributing our joy. Are there certain kids, that kid, just discipline, negative, punitive interactions, repeated. So even when we think about demonstrating enthusiasm and joy, we can think about equity. And are you distributing it fairly? Are people getting it? Especially with students who you're stuck in a rut with. How often do they get to see you be enthusiastic and joyful when you can join with them? So this really struck me. Jasmine, you made a note today about how you didn't feel capable in math. And one of our modules touches on that, because I think that's so powerful in undermining relationships. How can you develop a really good relationship with your math teacher when you aren't feeling valued and capable in that room? It just doesn't fit. And this is where we get straight to the instruction, right? That I loved how the students talk about supports. And it's all interconnected with relationships. Relationships are not just in this little box that you just have in hallways and you ask, get ready for prom. It's not that. It's kind of all the interactions you're having around the content and the supports you're given. And this is something we really try to drive home in the core in these modules 3 through 5. So you yourself hopefully have had sensations of feeling capable and valued in your workplace, hopefully. So what made you feel that way? How do we create contexts where kids feel capable and valued? I think this is a really important way to frame this. And what we talk about are 2 ways. Relevancy, focusing on what matters to students, and giving opportunity for leadership. So in our own jobs, I feel like my work is incredibly relevant to my own passions, and I also feel like I get opportunities like this. Wow, there's a lot of leadership and autonomy at this moment for me. It's very exciting. So I think all of us really thrive under those conditions. So think about I think we hear a lot about this, by the way. Let's make the content relevant to youth. So I think we hear, like, it's not like, oh yeah, we've heard this, but really, if you open the doors to all your classroom, how relevant, and I'd say we froze frame, and I went and interviewed each kid. You feeling like this is relevant to you? You feeling like this is relevant to you? It has personal meaning. I'd be curious to know where it comes up. I think there'll be huge variability across your rooms, probably. Some teachers are hooking these students in. So I have watched hundreds of hours of classrooms, and I often see a teacher inch towards relevancy, where they're trying to hook into some student's experience, but then it's like they kind of just drop it right there. It's like they need to go one step further to really hook their students in. Or I see content that feels like it could be so relevant to students. So let me give you this is a concept I think is really key. I'm pulling this in. Dorothy Steele has this book called Identity, Safety in Classrooms. And to me, I think right away about this idea of relevancy. How do you assure students that their social identities are an asset rather than a barrier to classroom success? So think our identities are multiple, right? Dada talked about being a father. That's part of your identity, right? Now it's integrated into your identity. So the fatherhood piece of your identity is made salient with Zach as a father. He's hooking in. His interactions are relevant to you. But I think we can think about content being relevant. So imagine a Spanish language teacher teaching monolingual English-speaking students, right? They scout around the school and they pull in bilingual Spanish-English teachers to come in as the experts, to talk to their students about what it's like to be living with 2 or 3 languages for that matter, how they experience code switching, what language do they dream in? I mean, you can come up with so many great questions where you get the students up in the front talking about making their life experience relevant and also giving them autonomy and leadership, those students who are speaking Spanish in the home, for example. So I think it takes some creativity, but I think we need to kind of move in this direction to really integrate leadership and relevancy. So I'm going to stop for a second and ask for you to turn to each other in a few minutes, but I want to also talk about leadership and agency now. So for building relationships in the classroom, a practical strategy is to work on opportunities for leadership. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen very often. Most classrooms are dominated by teacher talk, and it's just like this. You're sitting back there, I'm sitting here, there's this gulf. You don't get a chance to come up here and share your experiences. Students aren't encouraged to present their ideas. They're often asked to be quiet and not talk to each other. So what's preventing us from transforming classrooms to bring in students' leadership? I think it's actually a complex answer. Some of it is that we need efficiency. We don't have time to get derailed by student presentations. We got to move on. But some of it has to do with our own discomfort of unpredictability. In our My Teaching Partner, we try to train teachers to kind of bring in more opportunities for student leadership. And there's huge resistance, including allowing for movement, right? It's kind of a basic thing, but how much do students even get to move in a room because there's fear of disorder and chaos in small spaces with large classrooms, right? So we do have some structural constraints. But I still think we need to kind of dig deep and ask ourselves, what gets in the way of letting students take on meaningful leadership roles in the classroom? Not so much, passing out papers or collecting papers, but what else can they do to teach their peers? How can we engage their own knowledge from their own identities? So this is just a question for you. And wait, I'm going to back it up for a second. I also want to lay in some issues around equity. So I did professional development with a school where we took, teachers got release time, and it was a very tracked, racially divided high school. And the teachers shadowed 2 different kids through their entire day. We mixed it up by race and achievement level and track level. We kind of charted all the kids in the school, and we picked out so that if you were a teacher, you were kind of following a lower track kid and a higher track kid. And it blew their minds what they experienced those days, because they did 2 full school days. So it did take commitment and release time, but all they did was trail them. And kids acted like they normally would. They went and played video games and cut class. I mean, they said, hey, shadow, and they just did their thing. But what the teachers noted was the higher track classrooms in this school were predominantly white and Asian. There was tons of autonomy. Kids were sitting in seminar. They were eating. Their feet were on, it was like a college seminar classroom. It was all back and forth discussion. The lower track classrooms were very sheet work, rigid, rows, controlled. You were in trouble for eating. There was a whole different relationship to the rules and policing in the very same school. So when we think about leadership opportunities and autonomy, we need to also think about are there certain settings where we're kind of putting straitjackets on the kids because there's some fear of chaos and fear of losing control. So I was hoping that folks can maybe talk to each other a little bit about how in their school district have they seen great classrooms where kids have great leadership experiences? Are there times when you yourself felt more inflexible than you needed to be? And what was that going on for you? Have you had success providing leadership to a student with a history of discipline interactions? So the theme of this mini discussion amongst yourselves is this idea of autonomy and leadership opportunities. And what do you think is holding us all back in terms of creating classrooms that infuse more of this? So let's take a few minutes, if you might, and keep up the energy. About 3 minutes to chat with each other. Thank you. So what struck me, if I might share from my little table and sitting in, was the tension of an administrator who's trying to give leadership opportunities to a student who's getting disciplinary referral, but then the impression management that requires for a school. Not everyone's on board with the non-punitive process. And if this student doesn't walk out with, I'm sorry, I'm remorseful, wearing remorse on his or her sleeve, then the teachers might think no punishment occurred and therefore they're getting away with it. And so I've heard this tension a lot where it's almost like administrators are doing sneak attack humane interventions, but they don't really want to publicize it. Just in case their teachers find out. But I think there's a very real tension. And I think that your comment that not everybody's on board was key, because I see that it's kind of turning the cruise ship together of understanding deeply why do we think punitive action is the best intervention for change. On the core, a teacher reflects on how when she was a new teacher working in a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood, she was told to punish all the time, that she had to take away recess. You know, it was all this punishment framework, and she had struggles with one kid in particular. And she said, you know what, this isn't working. I keep holding him back from recess. I'm gonna flip the script and I'm gonna give him tons of leadership opportunities. And she said everything changed. But meanwhile, she's a little room in a big building, and she has to manage the impression that makes on her colleagues. She doesn't talk about that part, but I think that's very real. The pressure, the peer pressure among staff to kind of keep up with the punitive piece is as seen as the only acceptable piece. If other people experience that, I want to share stories of how they're kind of managing the turnaround process in their schools related to giving kids leadership and autonomy opportunities, but then the pressure not to. Or any other comments about this discussion that came up at your tables that you'd like to share? I heard you talking out there, so there's something going on. Because people are saying, you know, there's real obstacles sometimes to giving autonomy and leadership or movement in the classroom, you know, with class sizes or feeling like you've got a lot of content to cover. Does anyone have a successful story where they use leadership and autonomy as a way, as an intervention really, around in terms of discipline?
Really all the time.
All the time.
All the time. But you do swim against the tide sometimes, but you have to let the real positive results of that speak for themselves. And I don't think you should be quiet about it. I think you should shout from the rooftops about the success of that, and just let the positive effects speak far more loudly than I can, and I can speak pretty loudly about these things. But the success of the student really says it all.
So thank you for that. So she's saying, you know, let's shout from the rooftop when it works for the kid in terms of giving leadership. Shine a spotlight.
Yeah.
Thank you.
A success story with a student who was, you know, having a lot of disciplinary problems in classes he wasn't feeling important in or feeling heard in, and when he was given leadership in a class that he really did like, it turned around the way he saw himself. You know, he didn't have to be the student who acts out in class, and it turned around the way that his peers saw him as well. So his peers started to switch, well, I'm not looking at this kid as the one who's getting kicked out of class every 30 minutes, I'm looking at this kid as the one who's, you know, helping in our video class and doing this. And so, you know, it did start to change and lessen some of the behaviors that he was acting out in class.
So it sounded like it interrupted the self-fulfilling prophecy idea, right? I interviewed a kid who once said, you know, if you expect me to act the fool, I can act the fool. You know, he really had it, and he talked about the peer pressure too. Like, you know, I found a niche for myself here, which is to play that role. And I think kind of trying to get out of that rut, to overuse that metaphor, you know, it sounded like that was a powerful experience.
And I'm teaching a 7th and 8th grade reading class in middle school that is basically the lowest 18 readers in the 7th and 8th grade. And they have a wide range of needs, everywhere from I've got 4 newcomer English language learners to kids with disabilities to exited ELs that just have a history of being in the lowest reading group since, you know, probably kindergarten. So they're very reluctant learners, and we've been taking this quarter to build our relationship and getting to know each other. And I've given 4 of my higher performing exited ELs the responsibility of pairing with my newcomers in the class to explain the directions and the things that I'm talking about in Spanish so that they can understand what I'm doing and feel like they can participate, you know, at the same level that the other kids are, you know, and feel like they can engage in the learning. And that's been really empowering for those kids that are the helpers. They're really taking ownership of that, and they're actually coming to me, wanting to meet with me outside of the class time and saying, you know, I wanted to tell you something that, you know, Saida said to me, you know, and, you know, they're just so excited about the things that they are experiencing by being those students.
So they're becoming teacher's aid.
Exactly.
You can really see it in their demeanor and the way they're connecting.
And I call them that. They're my teacher helpers. So it's been very empowering for them.
kind of segueing into this a little bit. I mentioned restorative justice, but I think for those folks who are quite familiar, this will ring a bell, but I think there's aspects of restorative practices and restorative justice that are very empowering to youth in a way that can give them that agency. So for those of you who should know these questions, these are the restorative questions that are supposed to be kind of floating about your school, helping kids do collaborative problem solving around conflict. So the idea of turning over the keys to them, supporting and scaffolding them in problem solving, I think can be very powerful. They get a chance to not kind of have it come top down about how to solve and how to repair the harm. I was interviewing a student whose school was very much RJ infused, and he said the following. He said, even outside of here, you have it in your head. I've done that like 5 times already. I got into trouble. I did the questions, the restorative questions, right there in my head. They look at me like, what? But I'm like, oh, nothing. I'm just doing the restorative questions. So I love that quote because, I think he's just really sharing with us how much he can learn through these kind of agentic processes of problem solving. He had that opportunity. He had internalized them. Okay, so the last module I want to share a couple strategies with you on is promoting engagement. So this is a little of the no-brainer. We know when kids are more engaged, there's more learning, right? But also there's a feedback loop for better relationships. So we heard on the panel a lot about engagement in the current school that folks are in working on their GED. The engagement is feeding into the relationships. The more, the better the relationships, feeding into the engagement. It's just one big cycle. So, oh look, I have a graphic to show that cycle. So we see it, how bi-directional it is. So engaging classrooms are key for relationship building. You know, again, I think I'm just hitting that hammer on the head, or the nail on the head over and over, that it's not just side relationships. It's all connected to the learning process, which was so beautifully brought to life by the panel. So in our module 5, we really touch on some basics around how to create classroom routines. So this is all your, you know all this so well, good classroom management. But I think what's also important is to think about equity here. Are you attending to who are you attending to the positive with? I think it's important to know ourselves well enough to know I tend to connect with these types of kids, but I don't tend to connect with those types of kids. As educators, we need to become aware of that and catch ourselves. That's that awareness bubble. And then kind of equitably distribute our praise. So a lot of people are doing PBIS, which is great, positive reinforcement. But what I hear from a lot of schools doing PBIS is that the same kids don't get to go on the field trip because they didn't earn the ticket. Over and over, it's the same kind of, and then they feel like they're stuck in a rut with those same kids. And so it gets back to this idea of really being mindful about attending to the positive and having that observation where we can pick up on the positive. I also want to just point out something else before going on about inspiring learning. We have this whole section of the module is on presenting cognitive challenge. This goes right to my teaching partner finding in that study. Do you guys remember the analysis and inquiry finding we had? We talked to teachers in this module about using hands-on, minds-on involvement, varying learning formats, trying all different ways of engaging kids and showcasing their knowledge through role plays and drawings and songs and poems, integrating technology in a new way. Hopefully not all of the corrupting of the minds technology. So we have a whole section on there that's about that. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Miss Good. We read something from her earlier, but she also said in terms of attending to the positive, she said, I pull them to the side when they're doing something well too. So they don't always know the reason they're being called out. I may pull you to the side and say, I see you focused today, and I like that, keep it going, because I see you're trying to make a big improvement and I appreciate it. That small positive reinforcement helped them along the way. So I think this is all very familiar to you, but it's so easy to lose track of how our positive reinforcement is distributed, frankly, in the classroom and how uneven it can be. And especially because of what I said before, that we have confirmation bias, and it's hard for us sometimes to pick out the positives when kids who are dysregulated and struggling. So good news notes homes. Everybody knows about these. How often do they really happen in your school? So I want to talk about a comment that was made about this idea that, I think it was Andrea said, a little note on a paper can be a big, who said, did I get that right? No, it's Dada who said that. Like, hey, you did a good job. So this is called, people are talking about this notion of wise feedback. Here's some feedback I'm writing down, but I'm going to also give you a pat on the back and encouragement. It turns out that can reduce the racial disparities in achievement. There's some research on that. So thinking about this notion of wise feedback, where you at different turns are constantly trying to do some affirmations with your students and encouragement, even if it's just the smallest gesture. So it doesn't have to be a note home, it can be a note to the student about their behavior or their progress. Okay, so finally, building a reinforcing environment. This is the last strategy I'm going to talk about today. So an alarmingly low percentage of classrooms actually offer a reinforcing environment. There's very little, there's good research showing that there's not a lot of feedback that students get in classrooms. It actually can be quite low quality and perfunctory, or no feedback at all. If students are just sitting and listening and the teacher's kind of lecturing. So it turns out that very basic affirmations to students, so reflective listening, it's kind of a basic a skill. Just reflect back what the student said. It goes a long way. So I was talking to a teacher and we were working on these issues in her classroom, and she said, you know what? I just called that Zach's way of solving the problem. And then the whole year, every time they did a certain kind of math problem, they said, do it Zach's way. It just became a moniker in the classroom. And this was a struggling learner, and it was so powerful to him to have his own way of doing the problem. But it's those kinds of small gestures, that doesn't seem so small to me, but that can really pull that student into learning and engaging and having that relationship. So we talk about this idea of, we interview Pedro Nogueira, and he's got some clips on here. And in this quote here, he simply says, the real learning is in their revision and resubmission. So it's a call for teachers to really work on how are they letting students do revision and resubmission and revising their ideas. In the interest of time, I'm going to flip to the next slide. We also train teachers to talk about, to think about feedback loops. So when a student hits a ping pong ball to you, metaphorically, do you just hit it back once, or you don't hit it back at all? You just catch it and say, yeah, that's right or that's wrong. Or do you hit it back to them, and then they have to volley an idea back to you? So you're looking to create a volley of ideas. Really good feedback loops also can build and scaffold knowledge. And then finally, we cannot forget about the power of peers in the room for relationship building and feedback. This is another shout out to Andreas, but I took note when he said, let's clap for Jackson. Because what he just did was enact this principle of peer affirmation. And how can we engage that more in classrooms where peers are feeding back and affirming each other? And here's just some ideas that we throw out there to do so. Okay, so I have tried to hit some actionable ideas with you today. I am hoping that your curiosity is piqued about the core, since it's, thankfully, our funder has made it online and free for all to use at coreclassrooms.org. I think a next point for us in this work is to really think about, here's some teachers who went through the module and some of their feedback, and we're kind of doing ongoing evaluation at this point. But I also think these core modules might just be a starting point in your school, that there's concepts that we present, which you got a big picture overview of today, that you might want to pull out on and really work as a staff and more systematically. So I don't think any kind of one-shot PD is going to do it. You might pair it with coaching, you might pair it with PLCs, you might read a book and pair it, I think there's all different creative ways to kind of log into this system and have people do some self-reflection and come back and work with the group. And we can talk more about that too. But I'm going to end with this slide because I think this is the urgency of the work. We have to get back to the heart issue of the urgency of the work, to work on prevention and relationship building so that these students who presented today can feel that sense of belonging and connection with teachers in their middle and high school years. So thanks for your attention today. It's been a fun afternoon. hard workers that pulled together the core module that we all worked on together. So thank you. And this is the questions time. If there's any, I know we're closing out. We're good, okay.
Never say closing out.
Never say closing out. Shh, everyone leaves. We're not closing out. Do not put papers away. Any questions about, I covered a lot of different material, kind of raced through some of the strategies. Those are saturated. I made it through 150 slides or so. Saturation been PowerPointified officially. Okay. Is there an evaluation like this? Yes. Okay.
I just want, don't go.
I just want us to show our appreciation to the student panel, to Anne for flying in last night after she taught all day, and for the information that was shared today, and to you for all the great questions and the insight and your patience. As I know, as teachers and busy people, it's hard to sit, so we really do appreciate that. But please join me in turning our This is, we have recorded this, so if you're interested in, we will, as soon as the transcript is done, we will post it. So if you want access to that, just let us know. We want to make this available. I think that there was some really valuable information and insights, and it was such a nice kind of confirmation of Anne's work, what the students were saying, and I really think that it really gives a great deal of insight to people about what's happening. This is the conclusion of our program, but don't go. We really appreciate you coming today, and one of the things our payment, so to speak, to IES about this is for us to collect some evaluation information from you. So you should have gotten an email invitation in your mailbox, or you can just type this into this URL and you should be able to pull it up. It's pretty simple, it's not hard, it takes a couple of minutes, but we really would appreciate you filling that out before you go. And while you're doing that, I want to tell you about one last thing, and we have a free service, and it's called, I want to introduce you to Jennifer. She is a colleague of ours that is back in our office, and she's a librarian. It's called Ask REL. And if you have a question about a problem of practice, then you can either email her or you can email me and we'll get it to her, and she will look for the latest research and evidence around that question. I asked her yesterday, so I submitted 4 questions, she's got 7 questions ahead of you, Vicki. So we have a lot of questions about chronic absenteeism and those types of things, and we are always looking for what's the most available evidence out there. If it is a research article that you have to have a subscription to get, she will attach that article free of charge to a synopsis that she gets back to you. So she'll give you the article, she'll give you a brief description of what it is, and if it's not accessible free, she will attach that article to the email that comes back to you. It used to be that she could turn them out in a day, and now she is getting rather popular, and so it's taking 2 to 3 weeks to turn it around, but it is a very valuable service. It's free of charge, so please take advantage of it. Any other questions? And as you fill out your evaluation, I just want to thank you for coming today, thank you for your commitment to equity, and I really want to wish you the best of luck in your important work. That's it for today. There's cookies over there. We want to take no cookies home back to our desks. They are for you to take, so please take cookies, have a cup of coffee. Students are here, Anne's here. If you want to come up and chat for a bit, that would be great. So anyway, thanks so much, and safe travels home.